step-by-step SEO training course for 2024. How to SEO Cascading Style Sheets, also known as CSS. In this video session, we're going to see how we're meant to approach search engine optimization of CSS files. Cascading style sheets are to do with web page design shown to website visitors. If we were to remove some styles from this landing page example, this is how the page will look like without CSS, so to speak, okay? Now, Google search algorithms can analyze page experience, as in, it can analyze the design elements as well. So how do we then search engine optimize CSS files? First thing to do is look at the theme that you're using and ask yourself, you know what? 2024 Google ranking world is changing. So therefore, can you find a better website theme? So if you're not comfortable editing code and so on, maybe that may be an option. Because certain website themes require many different CSS files just to render the page itself. So you can use tools available to you, such as you can press on F12 on your keyboard and bring out coverage tab and then analyze the page itself. Here you will see what CSS files are loaded. You can filter CSS and take a look at what is shown here. Let's take a look at this particular e-commerce site and conduct the same analysis, because then you will see the importance of CSS optimization. Because in this example, there are many different CSS files that's loaded just so that this web page can render, and yet some of them are not even used. So first rule, identify what is used and what is not used. Then ask yourself, okay, the CSS files that's requested and yet not used, can you remove them from page load render? As in this, I'll show you the WordPress example. In my scenario, I'm saying, okay, when the page is, let's say, contact page, render different styles. If the page is, let's say, blog posts, render different styles. So that's one way. Also, if there are many different CSS files that's being called on, then you can perhaps group them into, let's say, one file. So instead of calling 5, you just call 1. So that's quick and easy CSS optimization techniques. Then you have tools available. Google Search Console is your website's friend when it comes to mobile usability. In the experience report, mobile usability should not have any issues. These are all related to CSS. So triple check this. RankYa YouTube channel has the tutorials for fixing Search Console mobile usability errors. Okay, what else can we do in terms of optimizing CSS? What we can do is we can analyze the style sheets and identify what's used and what's not used. Using Web Developer Toolbar Coverage tab, you can see that some CSS rules highlighted in red is not used. So then you have to say, okay, can you remove those rules? Having said that, it is absolutely important to triple check different devices by using device emulator. Let's say iPad Air, This is how it will look. So when you're optimizing the CSS using the coverage tab, you can identify the rules that's used and that's not used. But if you don't do the tests using different devices, then that could cause problems. Also, certain parts of a website renders differently, as in the page styles are different. Let's say in this scenario, perhaps the home page is different, is in structure different. So you need to run this test on different parts of a website. In fact, this is a great CSS optimization, as in identify what is used, what's not used. Particularly if you're using pre-made themes, whereby most of them use CSS libraries. Perhaps 50% of the file itself is not used, okay? So I won't show how to do that because that could be complex. Well, I'll show you some tips here. Let's imagine a CSS rules that you've identified as not used. Then it's just a matter of removing the declarations and then load the page accordingly. Okay, so also let me share a tip with you. If you're using coverage tab and the CSS files for your own website, you can't see the color code here. That's because the coverage tab will not show what's used and what's not used if the CSS file is minified. That means you need to unminify it and then analyze. Now, another thing is, let's imagine this scenario. This particular web page design element is rather complex. I think this is built on Shopify platform. And looking at it, you may say, okay, you know what? It's a pre-made theme. I really cannot make major modifications. If that's the case, perhaps updating the theme to be more mobile friendly and less complex. Because in 2024, user experience will become even more important, particularly mobile friendliness of the website. Because as we hover around the web page elements, you can see the design is rather complex. So your job perhaps could be, okay, can I simplify the web page design? Because HTML semantics works as in when the browser loads the page itself. Let's imagine, calculating this area here. The HTML node tree is a document object model. If the structure of it is complex, so the web page theme structure is complex, then it takes longer time for the browser to calculate that. Thus, heavier page load times. Meaning, simplicity in design will always outperform complexity of website design, okay? Also, if you're a web developer, for example, perhaps you're optimizing your client's website, then there's actually more different techniques, such as you can create IDs or classes in such way that instead of creating, let's say, 4 different rules, perhaps you can create one and use that. Because CSS, as in Cascading Style Sheet, the rules cascade down. And specificity always wins. What that means is, let's imagine font sizes. in this landing page, let's find all the font size declarations. Okay. There is one in the root. So now that will cascade throughout different font sizes, as in all of it, on the entire web page, because it's the root declaration here. Then let's imagine font sizes for web forms or the text area. So instead of declaring 5 different font sizes, you may just optimize one declaration and use the cascading rules to cascade to different parts of the web page. As we can see, the button here, it's also using font size, which is 100%. Okay, let's imagine blog quote. There's another font size declaration. Surely sometimes you may leave these in place depending on your website structure, but understand how cascading style sheets work, as in the rules cascade. So as you can see in this scenario, there is 100 different font size declaration. Make sense? In this example, media query is also changing font sizes. Now at times that may be perfectly okay, but at other times you can optimize them. Also, if you're a web developer, as I've said, in this scenario we've got action links for SEO course. That's the class for the A element, right? So then, can you then say something like this? Action links SEO course. See what happened here? Because the browsers need to read all these characters. What if I then say A, B, C? So now that's going to be a little bit faster. I know you don't need to go into that depth in terms of CSS optimization. I'm just showing you the possibilities just in case you're a web developer. So, how to SEO CSS is all about making sure that HTTP requests are reduced due to CSS files. You can group them. You can analyze the web page elements, identify what's used and what's not used. You can utilize the rules for CSS cascading rules. So instead of calling 10 different rules, perhaps calling one and let that cascade. Choosing a simpler design, knowing that each node within the DOM tree can add complexity for page render. Also, you can identify critical CSS that is needed for above the fold area, and you can place that within the head portion, while the non-critical CSS can be perhaps placed elsewhere. Perhaps you can identify critical CSS and load that in one style sheet file, and then load the non-critical CSS in another. Also, CSS doesn't need to be just in the head portion of HTML document. But sometimes externalizing CSS may be ideal, as in inline CSS rules can be utilized. Let's imagine I want to style this heading 2. Let's say I want to declare the color. Let's say red. Let's preview. I need to import that because of the rules that I have in my file. Now you will see that's an inline CSS. Sometimes, depending on the content management system that you're using, you may have things like font weight 400, things like this. They need to be cleaned up, because it is more than likely that the content management system is adding that by default, and you may not need it to display the style of certain elements. Okay, so inline style can often be used, no problems, but if it's used and it adds page load burden, then you need to step back and say, okay, how else can I style that HTML element? Google Search Console, mobile usability errors, they must be fixed because it's mobile first index world. What that means is Google looks at the mobile version of your website first. You also have tools such as mobile friendly test. You can conduct tests for your website and different landing pages. You can view tested page. You can look at the HTML. You can look at the screenshot. You can also have more info. One way or another, I can basically guarantee you that when you optimize the CSS of your own website or your client's website, it will improve page load times and also take care of a lot of core web vital issues shown in Google Search Console. Now, if you are not comfortable coding and so on, then perhaps hire a web developer or a CSS expert and show them this video tutorial. I thank you for learning with RankYa, and I'll talk with you in the next video session.